But first, a meeting between India's Prime Minister and China's top diplomat reportedly happening this hour, as both sides work towards improving relations after years of tensions along the disputed Himalayan border. Wang Yi held talks with Indian National Security Advisor Ajit Doval earlier today. The two officials praised the strengthened ties between the countries and agreed to hold their next border meeting in China next year. Discussions had been expected to focus scaling back military presence along the border and the resumption of trade in light of Washington's tariffs.
We find that with this new energy and the new momentum, that it is this thing with your personal efforts and with the maturity and the sense of responsibility of our diplomatic teams and our missions in the countries, your ambassador here, and also our armies on the borders, we have been able to make it this thing.
我们愿在这个基础之上，在大湾会谈当中，进一步的汇集我们的共识，为下一步的我们的边界问题的磋商来这个明确我们的方向和具体的目标，同时也为两国关系的改善和发展来营造更好的条件。
Well, to unpack some of those comments, we have Rebecca Bundhun joining us live from New Delhi and CNA's Tan Yu Guan, who is in Shanghai. And Rebecca, as we start with you first, both sides have said that they see progress in mending ties. But what does that mean specifically, and what does it look like on the ground when it comes to future cross-border trade?
Yes, that's right. There seem to be very positive comments coming through from both sides in terms of mending these ties, talking about peace and stability at the border. India's National Security Advisor Ajit Doval and Wang Yi sat down for the latest round of border talks. And there really seems to be this positive impetus coming through now in terms of actually trying to resolve that, trying to maintain peace, because that does go hand in hand with more generally boosting, mending and improving ties between India and China when it comes to bilateral relations, trade, economic issues, which have become all the more important against the backdrop of both India and China facing these tensions with Washington over tariffs. Now, in terms of border trade, last week, the foreign ministries of China and India had talked about resuming discussions in terms of resuming border trade. And with Wang Yi's visit to New Delhi, this is seen as a positive development in mending these relations more generally, although border trade between India and China may not be that significant in terms of numbers. It is seen as being hugely significant in terms of Himalayan communities, and also it's highly symbolic if that's something they can move towards. And certainly this is all part of this process, it seems, of the two countries really trying to improve their relations against that backdrop of strained ties with Washington, with Wang Yi's visit now being the latest development, and also looking ahead to Prime Minister Modi's visit to China later this month for the SCO summit.
Guan, what is the view from China? What will Mr. Wang want to bring to the table as part of his agenda, and what will he want to take away as a must-have achieved from this meeting?
Well, as far as India and China is concerned, they do have quite a number of issues to iron out, right? On the economic front, you have outstanding issues are taking on greater urgency, as Rebecca mentioned, because of the U.S. tariffs on both economies. We must know that before the tariffs, if we don't take into account trading blocs like the EU and ASEAN, the U.S. is both China's and India's common largest trading partner by country. Now, currently, Chinese companies are also facing restrictions in India. So that's something that Wang Yi can bring up. This includes TikTok as well as Huawei. Well, for India, it is seeking China to lift restrictions on rare earths, fertilizers, and tunnel boring machines. Now, rare earth magnets and minerals are key inputs for India's auto industry, while fertilizers are important for India's politically sensitive farming sector. Nearly half of India's population is engaged in agriculture, and they form an important voting bloc. While tunnel boring machines are important for infrastructure development in India, like urban metros and the Mumbai-Ahmedabad bullet train line. Now, there have been reports of a German company based in China being unable to export its boring machines due to administrative red tape. If these high-profile rail projects are delayed, it could embarrass the Indian government. So the two sides do have quite a few issues to iron out and many things they could cooperate upon. Now, as the headline in Global Times says this morning, quoting China's foreign minister, China and India should regard each other as partners rather than rivals or threats. Now, that is almost certainly the message that Wang Yi will bring to the Indian Prime Minister as the two men meet as we speak. Now, it is interesting to say that I do think that expectations for real outcomes in Beijing are pretty low, because it's interesting to note that while it received top billing in our news bulletin, China's Central Television main bulletin at 7 made no mention of Wang Yi's trip to China. I think it's safe to say even if there's no breakthrough, so long there's no breakdown in the talks and Modi is still scheduled to go to Tianjin, we could say that is already a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, interesting thought there. But Rebecca, is it too soon to ascertain whether India has achieved what it wanted from Mr. Wang's visit?
Well, his visit does seem to be a turning point, whatever comes out of it. It's seen as a really significant development. Since 2020, when there were those deadly military border clashes between India and China, there was that massive breakdown in relations, a significant deterioration. But we're now seeing this significant improvement, and Wang Yi's visit in and of itself is a signal of that. And there were positive comments that came through ahead of the border talks as Ajit Doval sat down with Wang Yi. Really, both sides looking, it seems, to maintain peace and stability there, which is highly significant after years of those tensions. And also, we've had some reports coming through in the local media citing sources saying that China has reached some kind of agreement with India when it comes to India's needs in terms of rare earths, fertilizers, and those tunnel boring machines. And these areas are very significant for India in terms of manufacturing, in terms of agriculture, infrastructure. So if that really does come through, that's seen as highly significant. And again, this is as India is really facing an escalating challenge with Washington, which is seen as a key partner, with Donald Trump saying that he's going to impose tariffs of 50% on India's imports because India is continuing these imports of Russian oil, which is a big concern for the US. So those relations with China clearly becoming more important. Wang Yi's visit is an important part of that, and his meeting with Prime Minister Narendra Modi ahead of Prime Minister Modi being set to visit China later this month for that SCO meeting, which is also seen as a massive development.
All right, Guan, we heard what Rebecca said, and of course, the US tariffs are one of those ties that bind China and India to forge stronger relations. What else does that, and why build those ties now?
Well, in one phrase, India is too big, too independent, and too close for China to ignore. As President Xi Jinping himself says, the essence of India-China relations is how these two large neighboring countries, developing countries, with populations of over 1.4 billion people can coexist. And they both hanker for the same thing, development, which President Xi says is the greatest common denominator between China and India. So while the two nations may fight over hundreds of thousands of square kilometers in the Himalayas, but in the bigger scheme of things, if that fighting affects development, it is not to the interest of either nation. Now, this is more so now, more so than ever, when both India and China, as we have already mentioned, are facing prospects of higher tariffs from their common biggest trading partner, the United States. From a geopolitical perspective, China is also already encircled by US allies on its eastern seafront, right? It doesn't need another staunch US ally in the south. India is a member of the US-led Quad, which brings together also Japan and Australia. But compared to Japan and Australia, India's allegiance to the US isn't as strong. India's independence in this respect is good for China to prevent complete encirclement. Having better ties with its southern neighbor prevents China from having to defend on two fronts. Now, economically, India is also a pretty big market, too big a market to ignore. We already saw how, I mentioned earlier, how political hostility can lead to bans and restrictions on Chinese companies. Now, improved ties will mean fewer curbs and more access. On the world stage, while China and India are both contenders for leadership in the global south, if China wants the likes of BRICS and Shanghai Cooperation Organization or SCO to act as counterweights to American-led alliances, it will need India as a partner. Joe?
Covering the stories from both sides. Thank you very much. CNA's Guan reporting live in Shanghai. Rebecca Bundhun is live from Mumbai.